I was betrayed. I didn't scream, I didn't fight, I didn't beg. I just did what I did, and now they call it the sweetest revenge. They betrayed me. I didn't scream, I didn't fight, I didn't beg. I just waited, and when I struck back, they called it the sweetest revenge. It all began on a cold Monday morning, the kind that makes you pull your coat tighter and question why you even bother leaving the house. I had trusted them, my colleagues, my friends, the people I shared late-night projects and endless coffee breaks with. We laughed together, we dreamed together, and I believe in our unspoken pact of loyalty. But loyalty, it seems, was a word they liked to toss around when it suited them, and discard the moment it became inconvenient. My promotion, the one I had poured months of work into, carefully crafting every report, every presentation, every tiny detail they thought nobody would notice, vanished into their hands. I discovered it in a quiet, humiliating way, seeing my name replaced by theirs on the company portal, an email congratulating them while my own inbox remained silent. The betrayal hit harder than I could have imagined. I felt my chest tighten, a knot forming that wouldn't loosen, and the room seemed to tilt around me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm into their offices, to throw accusations like knives. But I didn't. I smiled, nodded, and walked away, leaving them to their hollow victory, while a seed of something else took root inside me. Something colder, sharper, and far more satisfying than immediate rage. For weeks, I watched them. Every gesture, every smug smile, every careless assumption about their untouchable position. I noted the habits, the weaknesses, the patterns they flaunted without a second thought. They bragged in emails. They left windows open in the system. They underestimated the quiet ones, the patient ones. And I was both. I was quiet, I was patient, and I was meticulously crafting the scenario that would make them wish they had never dared to cross me. My revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be petty. It would be precise, inevitable, and undeniable. I imagined the moment they would realize what I had done, the shock, the disbelief, the helpless rage, and a small, dark part of me smiled at the thought. The plan began with research. I traced every digital footprint, every transaction, every connection that mattered. I learned what they valued, what they feared, who they relied on. I built a map of their life, a web that I could manipulate. It started with subtle hints, small nudges that appeared accidental. An important document slightly altered, a hint dropped in the wrong inbox, a meeting canceled at the last minute due to an inexplicable double booking. Each action was a thread pulled, each consequence a calculated domino. I watched as tension crept into their days, subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but unmistakably there. The seeds of doubt, the whispers of mistakes, the tiny fractures that would eventually become a chasm. And then came the turning point. I created a situation they couldn't control, a perfect storm that relied on their own arrogance and complacency. Every boast, every dismissive laugh at my supposed meekness fed into it. I orchestrated an event where their mistakes, hidden for so long behind walls of overconfidence, would explode into full view. I left no trace, no evidence, only the illusion of coincidence, the suggestion of bad luck. When it unfolded, it was poetic. Emails meant to be private landed in the wrong hands. Documents vanished at the exact moment they were needed. Allies they counted on found themselves unavailable. And the chaos looked entirely natural, as if the universe itself had decided to punish them. I watched from a distance, a silent observer to their unraveling, savoring every flicker of panic, every attempt to regain control. They called meetings, demanded explanations, sent frantic messages, and I stayed silent. I didn't gloat, I didn't intervene, I simply let the inevitability of their downfall play out. And when it was over, when the dust settled and the smoke cleared, the office was quiet in a way it had never been before. Their confidence shattered, their reputation tarnished, their alliances broken, and all I did was smile quietly to myself. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't humiliate them publicly. I didn't make a spectacle. I let the consequences of their own choices, amplified by my patience and precision, become the punishment. The sweetest revenge is always invisible until it's too late. And as I walked past their defeated faces, the hollow victories crumbling in their hands, I realized something. Revenge isn't just about satisfaction. It's about clarity, about proving to yourself that patience, cunning, and self-control can outweigh brute anger. I had taken the pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, and turned it into something inevitable, something that required no shouting, no confrontation, only time, observation, and the quiet art of planning. The lesson was clear. Those who betray, who deceive, who underestimate, eventually meet the weight of their own choices. And in that moment, I felt it, pure, untainted satisfaction. So, I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have screamed, fought, begged? Or would you have waited, watched, and orchestrated the downfall that felt like justice itself? Could you have been patient enough to let the sweetest revenge unfold without touching a single thing with your own hands, simply by letting the consequences of betrayal catch up to the guilty? After the initial shock, they thought the worst had passed. They assumed their arrogance and connections would shield them from any lasting consequences, that their promotion, their perceived power, was untouchable. But that assumption, that sense of invincibility, became the very foundation on which I built the next stage of my plan. Revenge, I realized, isn't a single act. It's a process, a series of moves that must unfold with precision, timing, and an understanding of human nature that borders on cruelty. And I had it all mapped in my mind. Every conversation, every glance, every minor slip could be transformed into a weapon if I only waited for the perfect moment. I started with the subtle manipulations. Nothing overt, nothing that would immediately raise suspicion. I befriended those who were already skeptical of them, quietly gathering allies who felt marginalized, overlooked, or ignored by the very people who had stolen from me. We exchanged information, rumors, and observations, all under the guise of casual chatter. Every fragment of knowledge was cataloged, every insight stored like a tool waiting for the right hand. They continued to boast, to mock, to flaunt their ill-gotten authority, and with each passing day, they dug themselves deeper into the trap I had set. The workplace became my chessboard. I began orchestrating minor inconveniences, perfectly timed disruptions that looked like accidents or coincidence. A crucial file would go missing at the exact moment it was needed for a presentation. A scheduled meeting would overlap with another commitment, and their carefully constructed image of competence would start to crack. They complained, they grumbled, they tried to adapt, but every solution they found played directly into the next layer of my plan. I was always one step ahead, predicting their every reaction, exploiting their overconfidence, and quietly enjoying the subtle chaos that began to ripple through their lives. But I didn't stop there. I realized that to create the perfect revenge, I needed to target what they valued most: their public image, their sense of superiority, and the fragile network of colleagues who still believed in them. I started planting seeds of doubt, carefully calculated whispers that questioned their competence, their decisions, their loyalty. Anonymous tips, slightly misleading emails, suggestions dropped at the right time in the wrong ears. Everything was designed to erode trust. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, cracks appeared in their armor. People who once followed them unquestioningly began to hesitate, to second-guess, to watch and wait. And I was always there, silent, observing, never rushing, letting the tension build like a storm gathering strength on the horizon. Meanwhile, I kept my own image intact. To the outside world, I was calm, professional, and even friendly. I smiled at them, complimented their successes, and engaged in casual conversation that concealed the full scope of my plan. No one suspected that beneath the polite exterior, I was orchestrating the downfall of those who had betrayed me. I had learned long ago that the greatest revenge is invisible, the kind that creeps up slowly, unnoticed, until it strikes with undeniable force. They could not see it coming because I had made sure they felt invincible, that every move they made seemed perfectly rational, perfectly secure. And yet, every move they made was another thread in the web I was weaving. Then came the critical turning point, the moment that would test everything I had prepared. I discovered a small, seemingly insignificant error in their workflow, a flaw they had overlooked in their rush to claim my achievements as their own. It was a gap that could be exploited, a crack in the foundation that, if leveraged correctly, could trigger a chain reaction of embarrassment, confusion, and public exposure. I spent days analyzing it, determining how to use it without drawing attention to myself, creating scenarios where their own decisions would ensure the collapse of their carefully constructed image. Every contingency was accounted for, every potential risk minimized. The excitement, the anticipation, it was intoxicating. I felt a surge of energy I hadn't known since the betrayal first hit me. The thrill of being in control, the satisfaction of seeing justice unfold according to my design. I also knew that timing was everything. Strike too early, and they might recover. Wait too long, and someone else could intervene, or the opportunity could vanish. I calculated, I observed, I waited. And finally, the moment arrived. A crucial presentation, attended by executives and stakeholders, became the stage on which my revenge would play out. Everything had been set up perfectly. I had arranged for critical files to be lost at precisely the right moment, for key communications to be misdirected, for their most important arguments to be undermined by seemingly trivial errors. The chaos unfolded exactly as planned, each mistake compounding the previous one, each blunder magnified by the pressure of the audience. I watched from my seat, heart pounding, yet outwardly calm, as the facade of competence crumbled around them. Their panic was immediate. The confident smiles, the prepared speeches, the rehearsed presentations, all dissolved into frantic scrambling, whispered excuses, and flustered attempts to regain control. And the irony, the sweet, cruel irony, was that every move they made to fix the situation only made it worse, each correction amplifying the disaster I had orchestrated. I had created a perfect storm, powered not by force, but by patience, observation, and precise manipulation of human behavior. And when the final realization hit them, that this was not coincidence, not bad luck, but the inevitable consequence of their own arrogance, they froze. Shock, disbelief, and helpless fury contorted their faces, and I finally allowed myself a private smile. The revenge was working perfectly, as if the universe itself had decided to punish them for their betrayal. I left the room later, blending into the background, allowing the aftermath to speak for itself. Whispers spread through the office, questions were raised, and eyes that once looked up to them with respect now darted cautiously, uncertain, wary. The balance of power had shifted subtly, irrevocably, and all I had done was wait, watch, and guide the inevitable with quiet precision. So now, I ask you, if you were in my place, would you have had the patience to plan such a precise, devastating revenge? Would you have watched silently as those who wronged you stumbled? Or would you have acted impulsively, risking everything for immediate satisfaction? Could you have resisted the urge to shout, to confront, to expose, and instead let the consequences of betrayal unfold on their own? What would you have done if the opportunity for the perfect revenge presented itself, silently, waiting for you to take the first step? The aftermath of the presentation was more delicious than I had imagined. I watched from the shadows as my betrayers tried desperately to salvage their dignity, yet every effort they made only dug them deeper into the pit they had created for themselves. The whispers spread like wildfire through the office corridors, subtle at first, almost unnoticed, but growing louder with every passing day. Colleagues who once respected them now exchanged glances of doubt, small comments, and pointed questions that went unanswered. Every glance felt like a dagger to their pride, every small act of hesitation an echo of the chaos I had unleashed. And I, the invisible architect of their downfall, reveled quietly in the symphony of consequences. I had learned early on that revenge is not a single act, but a series of calculated movements. The first strike, though satisfying, was only the beginning. To truly claim victory, I needed to ensure that they would not recover, that their arrogance and deceit would continue to unravel, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the hollow shell of who they once believed themselves to be. I returned to my meticulous planning, observing their behavior, tracing their mistakes, and guiding their actions like a puppeteer. Each misstep was carefully cataloged, each reaction predicted, and I remained patient, always patient, letting the tension rise, letting the pressure build, until the perfect moment to strike again presented itself. Their overconfidence was their greatest weakness. Even after the presentation disaster, they believed they could charm, manipulate, and maneuver their way back into favor. They didn't see the invisible net I had woven around them, each thread connected to their habits, each trap disguised as chance or misfortune. I exploited every predictable impulse, their need for recognition, their fear of appearing incompetent, their reliance on allies who were quietly turning against them. I planted small suggestions, anonymous tips, hints that something was amiss, all while maintaining an appearance of calm professionalism. They trusted me still, unsuspecting, unaware that I was quietly orchestrating the final stages of their unraveling. One evening, I discovered an even more potent weakness, a financial oversight they had overlooked in their rush to secure my promotion and flaunt their success. A single misplaced decimal, a misfiled document, a transaction that could be traced and exposed. It was beautiful in its simplicity, an invisible flaw that could ignite a chain reaction of exposure, suspicion, and accountability. I knew immediately that this would be the weapon to finish what I had begun. I studied it, traced every connection, and plotted a way to make it appear accidental, the result of chance, while in reality it would reveal their incompetence and greed in front of everyone who mattered. I started setting the stage carefully. Emails were subtly redirected, access points monitored, conversations influenced without overt intervention. I nudged allies and colleagues to ask the right questions, to double-check the figures, to notice inconsistencies that my betrayers had overlooked. Each day, each action added pressure, and yet from the outside, it seemed entirely organic. There was no trace of my orchestration, no hint that the chaos was anything but a series of unfortunate coincidences. My betrayers continued to act with confidence, oblivious to the trap closing around them, and I savored every confident step they took toward their inevitable downfall. The tension grew, palpable and electric, like the calm before storm. I could see in their posture, their expressions, the way they moved through the office with forced composure. They were tense, uncertain, and yet still convinced they could control the narrative. That arrogance, their stubborn belief in their own untouchability, made the final act even sweeter. I had never felt such anticipation, such a heady mix of satisfaction and adrenaline, as I prepared to trigger the final collapse. Then came the moment. I engineered a meeting with key stakeholders, deliberately scheduled after a series of minor disruptions that had already shaken their confidence. I ensured that the flawed financial documents, previously unnoticed, were discovered at precisely the right moment. My betrayers were blindsided, scrambling desperately to explain the inconsistencies, fumbling through excuses that only made their guilt and incompetence more apparent. Every gesture, every word, every stumble was amplified by the high-stakes setting. I sat quietly, a shadow in the room, watching as the illusion of control slipped through their fingers and a private, almost guilty smile crept across my face. The climax unfolded with perfect symmetry. As their excuses faltered and their credibility crumbled, the room shifted. Colleagues whispered, eyes widened, and the executive's stern expressions bore into them like unyielding daggers. Every lie they tried to spin twisted tighter around their necks. Every attempt at damage control only deepened the collapse. And all the while, I remained unseen, untouched, the orchestrator of an impeccable, untraceable revenge. The satisfaction was exquisite, not because I had caused chaos, but because I had allowed the consequences of their own actions to strike with brutal precision. The lesson was clear. Betrayal cannot escape justice, and patience, cunning, and observation are far more powerful than impulsive rage. After the fallout, the office was never the same. My betrayers were no longer untouchable. Their confidence shattered, their alliances weakened, their reputation irreversibly tarnished. Yet I remained calm, professional, seemingly unaffected, while quietly savoring the results of months of meticulous planning. The ultimate revenge had not required confrontation, shouting, or direct conflict. It had required patience, intelligence, and the art of making the inevitable occur without interference, like a storm that builds unseen and strikes with devastating precision. And as I walked through the office corridors, watching the subtle, lingering consequences unfold, I reflected on the nature of true revenge. It is not about instant gratification or about satisfying raw emotion. It is about observation, strategy, and the quiet satisfaction of letting justice, meticulously calculated, take its course. I had turned betrayal into an instrument of clarity, humiliation into a lesson, and anger into power. The sweetest revenge is the one that leaves no trace of its origin, only the inevitable truth. So now I leave you with a question. If betrayal struck you like it struck me, could you have held back, observed, and planned? Could you have converted humiliation into a methodical, unstoppable force of justice? Or would the fire of immediate rage have consumed your opportunity for the perfect revenge? Would you have the patience, the cunning, and the foresight to let the inevitable consequences of betrayal play out with devastating precision? Could you resist the temptation to act impulsively and instead watch, wait, and orchestrate the moment that would leave no doubt who had emerged victorious? The air of the office had changed. It was heavier now, thick with tension and the subtle hum of suspicion that I had carefully cultivated over weeks. My betrayers, once untouchable in their arrogance, were stumbling, unsure of where the next threat might come from. Every glance over the shoulder, every hesitant step, every miscalculated word played perfectly into my hands. I watched quietly, a ghost in plain sight, as their world slowly unraveled. And now, the final act was close. The moment when patience and planning would merge into undeniable justice. I had already set the stage months before. Every minor disruption, every carefully planted whisper, every small mistake I had exploited had been leading to this crescendo. I knew that to deliver the ultimate revenge, I had to ensure that the fall would be spectacular, irreversible, and public enough to leave a permanent mark on their reputation. I had discovered yet another vulnerability, a high-stakes meeting with the board that they had confidently scheduled, believing that their prior success had erased all doubts. It was perfect, the perfect convergence of timing, hubris, and opportunity. I could taste the satisfaction even before it began. Preparation was meticulous. I double-checked every detail, calculated every possible reaction, and ensured that the mechanisms of exposure were flawless. The critical files that contained their overlooked mistakes were positioned to surface at the precise moment they would do the most damage. Emails that I had redirected weeks earlier now landed exactly where they needed to, triggering alarms and confusion without anyone suspecting interference. Every action had a consequence, every misstep amplified by the momentum I had built over time. The chaos was inevitable. They were walking into it like lambs, blind to the trap they had helped construct through arrogance and deceit. As the meeting began, they were still confident, smiling, rehearsed, believing they had somehow survived the subtle sabotage that had plagued them for weeks. I remained quiet, unassuming, observing the stage I had set. And then it began. The first domino fell. A small, seemingly minor question about a financial discrepancy, asked by someone they considered an ally, triggered a cascade of events. Their answers faltered, their arguments twisted upon themselves, and the carefully constructed facade of control began to crumble. My heart raced, not with fear, but with exhilaration. The moment I had waited for, the moment I had orchestrated so patiently, was unfolding exactly as planned. I could see the panic spreading across their faces. Eyes widened, hands trembled slightly, and voices rose in desperation. They attempted to redirect, to explain, to salvage the situation, but every move they made played directly into the next stage of the downfall I had prepared. The board members, previously unaware of the internal manipulations, began to see the cracks, the inconsistencies, the evidence of incompetence that my betrayers had worked so hard to conceal. It was poetic. The very skills and arrogance they had relied on to ascend now accelerated their collapse. I almost laughed quietly at the irony. Then came the ultimate blow. A critical document, one they assumed was securely hidden, was presented by a seemingly innocuous suggestion I had planted days earlier. Its contents exposed not only their mistakes, but their attempts to claim credit for my work, their subtle manipulations, and their mismanagement. The room fell silent, a thick, suffocating silence filled with disbelief and dawning realization. My betrayers' faces paled, their confident postures collapsed, and the executives' expressions shifted from curiosity to shock and anger. The trap had sprung, and it was perfect. The satisfaction was overwhelming, calm, controlled, and sweetly unrelenting. Every attempt they made to recover only worsened their position. Every excuse they offered, every frantic explanation, only revealed more of their incompetence and deceit. Colleagues whispered, some openly, others subtly, and the once loyal allies of my betrayers began to distance themselves. Their network of influence, carefully built over years, began to disintegrate. I watched as the once untouchable figures shrank under the weight of their own actions, powerless to regain control. And in that quiet observation, I felt the pure thrill of vindication, the knowledge that patience, planning, and precision could create a justice far more satisfying than immediate confrontation or impulsive retaliation. By the time the meeting ended, the damage was complete. My betrayers were humiliated, their credibility shattered, and their authority permanently diminished. The office, once a place of confidence for them, now seemed hostile, uncertain, and wary. I walked through the corridors, unnoticed, quietly observing the subtle shifts, the whispered comments, the suspicious glances, the reluctant avoidance. The power dynamics had shifted irreversibly, and I had orchestrated it all without ever raising my voice, without ever appearing to act. The ultimate revenge had been delivered, silent, elegant, and devastatingly effective. And yet, as satisfying as it was, there was a strange, reflective calm that followed. Revenge is not simply about punishment. It is about balance, about restoring what was taken and demonstrating the consequences of betrayal. I had taken the humiliation and theft directed at me and transformed it into a lesson. A perfectly executed reckoning that required no confrontation, only foresight, patience, and strategic precision. My betrayers would never forget the fall, and everyone around them had seen the consequences of arrogance and deceit. The lesson was clear. Betrayal carries a cost, and sometimes that cost is calculated with surgical precision, invisible until it strikes. Now, the question remains, if you were in my position, could you have planned and executed such a meticulous revenge? Could you have observed, waited, and orchestrated a downfall so precise that it seemed like fate rather than calculation? Or would you have acted impulsively, squandering the opportunity for the perfect justice? Could you have maintained composure, hidden your intentions, and allowed the inevitable consequences of betrayal to unfold with devastating clarity? The choice between immediate emotion and calculated patience is a test, one that separates fleeting anger from true, satisfying revenge. The final act was nothing short of cathartic. Weeks of meticulous planning, quiet observation, and subtle manipulation had led to this moment, a moment where the culmination of patience and precision would deliver not just punishment, but an unforgettable lesson. My betrayers, once so confident, so untouchable, were now fragile figures, stumbling under the weight of their own arrogance. Every miscalculation, every deceit, every stolen credit had been cataloged and amplified to perfection, and the final collapse was imminent. The air was electric with anticipation, even though I alone knew the scale of the storm about to strike. I had orchestrated a final, unavoidable confrontation without lifting a hand. The board had been informed, subtly, of all the inconsistencies, the manipulations, and the failures. Key allies who once supported them had quietly shifted allegiance, influenced by carefully planted suggestions and observations I had orchestrated. The moment of reckoning was arranged with impeccable timing, a meeting set at the peak of scrutiny, in front of those whose opinions mattered most, with every piece of evidence positioned to maximize exposure. I observed from my place in the shadows, calm, collected, while my betrayers strutted into the room, unaware that their world was about to implode. The first questions were small, almost casual, but they were precise, each one hitting a weak point I had identified weeks before. My betrayers' answers faltered, stumbled, and twisted upon themselves. The cracks, previously subtle, became chasms. Documents they had assumed were secure were revealed at just the right moments, highlighting not only their mistakes, but their attempts to claim credit for my work. The expressions on their faces were priceless: shock, disbelief, panic, and slowly, the dawning horror that they had been outmaneuvered at every turn. The room was tense, each second stretching, every whisper magnified. I could feel my pulse quicken with quiet satisfaction. Every attempt they made to salvage the situation only deepened their downfall. Their explanations contradicted each other, their authority eroded with every passing second. The board members, previously unaware of the full extent of the manipulations, now watched with growing concern, realizing the incompetence and deception that had been masked for so long. Their closest allies, those who had once supported them blindly, now hesitated, questioned, and some even spoke up, further unraveling the carefully constructed illusion of control. The final act of my revenge was unfolding exactly as I had envisioned: inevitable, irreversible, and devastatingly effective. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the point where all subtlety gave way to undeniable impact. A particularly damning piece of evidence, which I had positioned weeks prior to appear as if discovered by accident, was presented. It exposed not just the errors and theft, but the arrogance and deceit that had defined their rise. The room froze, eyes widened, jaws dropped, and the color drained from their faces. Panic and disbelief contorted their expressions, and the board members, now fully aware, began to question, to dissect, and to scrutinize with relentless precision. My betrayers were trapped in a web of their own making, and I watched silently as the consequences of their actions crashed down upon them. The thrill of this moment was indescribable. It was not merely satisfaction. It was the intoxicating clarity of justice, calculated and executed with flawless precision. No shouting, no confrontation, no impulsive rage had been necessary. Every detail, every small manipulation, every planted suggestion had built to this point. The chaos seemed natural, the exposure accidental, yet it was all orchestrated by my quiet patience and strategic foresight. Watching them struggle to recover, powerless, humiliated, and exposed, I felt a profound sense of triumph. This was not just revenge. It was justice served with elegance, inevitability, and style. As the meeting drew to a close, the room was thick with tension and disbelief. My betrayers were left in shambles, their credibility shattered, their influence diminished, and their reputation forever tarnished. Colleagues who had once followed them unquestioningly now looked at them with skepticism, and whispers of past misdeeds circulated with renewed intensity. I walked through the office, unnoticed and composed, quietly observing the lingering consequences. Every glance, every hesitant step, every subtle avoidance was a reminder of the power of patience, strategy, and calculated action. The ultimate revenge had been delivered, not with fury, but with cold, deliberate precision. In the quiet aftermath, I reflected on what had been accomplished. True revenge, I realized, is not about public spectacle or immediate gratification. It is about patience, foresight, and the ability to convert betrayal into opportunity, humiliation into a lesson, and anger into power. I had taken the harm inflicted upon me and transformed it into an instrument of clarity and justice, executed in a manner so precise that it seemed almost fated. My betrayers would never forget this fall, and those around them had witnessed the consequences of arrogance and deceit. The satisfaction was quiet, profound, and complete, a victory not of force, but of intellect, patience, and strategic mastery. And now, as I reflect on this journey, I leave you with a question. If betrayal were to strike you, could you have resisted immediate fury and planned the perfect reckoning? Could you have observed, waited, and orchestrated a downfall so precise that it seemed inevitable? Would you have had the patience to convert humiliation into triumph and deception into undeniable justice? Could you remain calm, unseen, and yet fully in control, allowing the consequences of betrayal to unfold with devastating clarity? So I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have acted with impulsive rage, or could you have embraced patience, cunning, and strategy to achieve the sweetest, most satisfying revenge imaginable? Could you have turned betrayal into your greatest triumph, leaving nothing to chance and nothing unresolved? The choice between immediate emotion and calculated justice is a test, one that separates fleeting anger from the enduring power of perfect revenge. And in the end, the answer defines not just the moment, but who you truly are.